Soviet engineering rarely prioritizes ergonomic comfort, delicate aesthetics, or lightweight finesse. It is built upon a foundation of undeniable, brutalist function. If a military demands a machine to punch half-inch holes through hardened steel plating from over a mile away, you do not build a highly tuned, sensitive instrument. You build a 75-pound steel anvil that feeds on explosive kinetic energy. You forge a weapon so violently loud, so incredibly concussive, that its muzzle blast alone can shatter nearby glass and physically disorient the men operating it. I am Dr. James Hoffer, a military historian and firearms technology specialist. In the realm of heavy machine guns, the American M2 Browning often steals the global spotlight. But today, we are completely shifting our tactical focus to the frozen steppes of the Eastern Front to examine its absolute greatest rival. We are tearing down the heavy steel and bizarre feed mechanics of the Soviet DShK, a weapon that aggressively dictated the flow of combat from 1938 all the way to the modern battlefields of today. By the late 1930s, the Soviet Red Army realized they had a massive ballistic problem. Their standard 7.62mm Maxim machine guns were fundamentally obsolete against the rapidly advancing threat of heavily armored attack aircraft and fast-moving light tanks. They desperately needed a massive, exponential upgrade in sheer physical trauma. The uncompromising answer was the massive 12.7 by 108mm cartridge. To put that gargantuan round into proper perspective, this Soviet cartridge is actually slightly longer and contains slightly more propellant powder than the legendary American .50 caliber. It fires a hardened projectile weighing roughly 740 grains at nearly 2,800 feet per second. When this massive armor-piercing incendiary round hits a target, it doesn't just cleanly penetrate. It violently shatters, burns, and completely liquefies light armor, turning engine blocks into useless metal slag. But harnessing this apocalyptic cartridge inside an automatic weapon was an engineering nightmare. The Soviets initially turned to their legendary designer, Vasily Degtyaryov. He boldly scaled up his existing gas-operated flap-locking action to massive proportions. However, his early designs suffered from a fatal, crippling flaw. The feed mechanism simply could not handle the immense weight, drag, and friction of pulling heavy canvas belts of 12.7mm ammunition into the gun. The heavy belts would snag, the feeding pawls would slip, and the weapon would constantly jam, rendering it a useless dead weight in combat. Enter Georgi Shpagin, a brilliant mechanical mind who would later become globally famous for designing the PPSH-41 submachine gun. Shpagin was brought in specifically to fix the feeding nightmare, and his solution was entirely unorthodox. He looked at the gun and completely scrapped the standard lever-actuated feed system. Instead, he designed a massive, bizarre rotary feed wheel mounted directly on top of the receiver. It looks exactly like a heavy steel squirrel cage. As the massive bolt carrier violently cycles backward under gas pressure, it physically drives a lever that rotates this cylindrical drum. The drum actively grabs the heavy steel ammunition belt, wraps it around the wheel, aggressively strips the massive cartridge entirely out of the link, and then shoves it sharply downward into the feed path. It was a heavy, complex, and highly unusual mechanical solution, but it worked with terrifying, unrelenting reliability. The resulting weapon was officially designated the DShK 1938, combining the names of both its creators, Degtyaryov and Shpagin. Look closely at any archival footage of a DShK laying down suppressive fire. Do not look at the massive receiver or the gunner. Focus your eyes entirely on the massive, unmistakable, multi-baffled muzzle brake at the end of the long barrel. Notice the sheer violence of the gas being vented sideways. That heavy piece of machined steel is absolutely vital to the weapon's survival. The explosive gas overpressure generated by the Soviet 12.7mm cartridge is so overwhelming that without that massive brake violently redirecting the blast, the sheer recoil would physically rip the weapon off its heavy steel mounting pins. It is a brilliant piece of engineering that tames an uncontrollable explosion into a manageable, cyclic rhythm of heavy destruction. Unlike Western militaries that primarily mounted their heavy machine guns on stationary tripods or bolted them to the decks of half-tracks, the Red Army deployed the DShK on a highly unique wheeled carriage designed by Ivan Sokolov. This massive carriage featured a heavy steel armor shield to protect the gunner's face and two large, heavy-duty steel wheels. This allowed a crew of heavily straining, exhausted infantrymen to physically drag the 160-pound assembly across the battlefield, effectively treating it like a miniature piece of towed artillery. But the true tactical brilliance of the Sokolov mount was its hidden transformation. If a squadron of German Stuka dive bombers suddenly shrieked out of the clouds, the Soviet crew did not have to abandon their gun. They could rapidly detach the heavy wheels, unfold three massive steel legs hidden within the carriage tail, and hoist the massive gun entirely upward. In under a minute, they instantly converted a low-profile ground attack weapon into a towering, dedicated anti-aircraft battery. The DShK earned its bloody, terrifying reputation in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad and the massive, sprawling tank battles of Kursk, violently shredding German half-tracks and swatting low-flying Luftwaffe aircraft out of the sky. But its story definitively did not end in 1945. Because of its incredibly rugged, dirt-tolerant rotary action, it was heavily exported across the globe by the Soviet Union. From the dense, humid jungles of Vietnam to the arid, rocky mountains of the Middle East. The distinct, incredibly slow, booming rhythm of the Dushka, as it is affectionately known by those who operate it, remains one of the most recognizable and terrifying auditory signatures in modern warfare. It is a weapon entirely devoid of elegance, built completely on the brutal philosophy that massive kinetic energy solves massive tactical problems. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the raw mechanics of Soviet heavy machinery. Keep analyzing the engineering behind the history, and I will see you in the next breakdown.